Testing. Hello? Hear ye, hear ye! We now call to order the first annual In Memoriam and the 28th annual ceremony to induct the Ancient and Honorable Order of the Buffalo. Good evening. I'm Madeline Wallace-Gross. I'm the chair of the Water Law section of the CBA. And before we introduce these illustrious people, we're going to begin with Star Waring, who is going to present the In Memoriam.
So welcome everyone, and as Madeline said, we're going to start off on a slightly more serious note before we get into the fun part of the evening. But we, on the Executive Council of the Water section of the CBA and the Water Congress, decided that it would be appropriate to recognize our colleagues, many of whom have left within the last 3 or 4 years and didn't have the honor of becoming a water buffalo because they were still working, and that is one of the criteria. So we have put together a program it's a brief program that recognizes their accomplishments. There are water engineers, water lawyers, a judge, legislators, water administrators, who have made very valuable contributions to the water profession. And on that note, please give your undivided attention to the 2 screens. Thank you. Harvey Curtis. David Hill. Judge Robert Behrman. Diane Hoppy. Sandy McDougall. Leo Eisel. Tim Flanagan. Gary Bostrom. Charlie Bartlett. Bill Turdlot. Thank you. Madeline?
For 28 years, the Executive Council has honored retired colleagues who have made significant contributions to Colorado water law. These include attorneys, engineers, judges, policymakers, and water managers. This year, the Executive Council is fortunate to honor 4 distinguished attorneys: David Harrison, Kim Lawrence, Jim Corbridge, and Tim Beaton. To begin, we're pleased to have Tim Beaton introduce David Harrison.
Good evening. David was an undergraduate Buffalo at CU and graduated at the top of his engineering class. After law school, he joined Ray Moses in the practice of water law in Boulder. David immediately had an impact on the field, successfully arguing the Carta Supreme Court case of Cache La Poudre Water Users Association, and he argued that the statutory construct known as the augmentation plan was constitutionally sound. Thus began David's substantial career in representing water districts, cities, ranchers, farmers, and private companies. I'm sure that there were more than a few water engineers that wished that David had gone into the water engineering practice rather than water law, because David would quiz them about their reports and their findings, and he ended up interrogating his own witnesses, which obviously was to the benefit of the case in the long run and made for a better work product. Throughout the years, David showed a keen interest in the public water domain. He was a member of the Colorado Water Conservation Board from 1989 through 1997, and he chaired the Technical Advisory Committee of the Colorado Decision Support System. David continued to follow his passion, and over the course of the last 2 decades, acted as senior advisor to the Global Freshwater Team of the Nature Conservancy. In so doing, he worked on demonstration projects in the Yangtze River Basin in China, the Mekong River in Southeast Asia, several tributaries of the Amazon, and water projects on the African continent. In this capacity, David facilitated discussions concerning a number of international hydropower protocols. David's mantra is, "I'm especially concerned about the long-term health of our rivers and lakes for both nature and people. Development of dams, levees, and water diversions is happening so readily. If we can just help influence that development to assure that we get the most out of river basins, both for the protection of nature and for the performance of that development, I will be satisfied to turn it over to our grandchildren." As you know, the American buffalo, more properly known as the bison, played an essential role in shaping the ecology of the Great Plains. In a similar vein, David Harrison has played a pivotal role in shaping Colorado water law, in moving forward the discussion of beneficent use of water on a local, state, regional, and global scale. Please welcome David Harrison.
In the town where I was born, lived a man who sailed to sea, and he told us of his life in the land of submarines.
I really do appreciate this very serious award and to join the serious ranks of the buffalo. But you know, excuse me, this has nothing to do with water buffalo, does it? Here's a water buffalo down here, Southeast Asia. All right, let me say something. First of all, I do really appreciate the memoriam. Appreciate doing that. And seriously, but also, I was relieved to see that my name was not included. I don't know what more to say at this point. I am honored, actually, in spite of my horsing around here. I see that the water community, water buffalo community, the people that are involved in water management and in trying to come up with solutions, it's evolved some, but in some fundamental ways. I think there's a constant thread, and I appreciate this. I would assert to you, and you can cheer me down if you think I'm wrong, that everyone in this room and everyone in this game, this enterprise, if I can call it that, is committed to trying to find win-win solutions for water management, for water development, for water protection. Myself, I appreciate, Tim, thank you for reiterating my sense. It's about water for people and nature, and I do believe that is the sort of the overriding commitment of people in Colorado. There may be exceptions, but that's what I'm standing for, and I hope you're with me on that. All right, who's next? Yeah, we'll give it to the next person. Way too long.
Now, we are pleased to have Andy Jones introduce Kim Lawrence.
Thank you. I've been working for and then with Kim as a partner for 20 years, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to introduce him here tonight. Kim's story actually starts in Africa. Some of you know that, but Kim was born in Oregon, but his parents moved to Africa, to the nation of Cameroon, when he was 3 months old, and he spent his first 13 years in Africa, and I think that left an indelible imprint on his life. In traditional fashion during that time period, he was sent to boarding school at age 7, 800 miles from his parents. So that explains a thing or two. They returned to the United States, I think, when Kim was 13, back to the state of Oregon, and and then to Boulder, and he attended CU, received his bachelor's in 1973, his master's in public administration in 1976, and his JD in 1977. After that, he moved to Greeley and came to represent the Central Colorado Water Conservancy District, which is an interesting story in and of itself. But that became really a formative thing in his career. He went on to represent the largest well augmentation group in the state, over 2,000 wells involved in that in Central alone, and numerous other augmentation clients on the South Platte River. He helped develop a number of important advances in water law and engineering that helped us address the well crisis we experienced in the South Platte following 2002, including things like the augmentation plan projection, the concept and the actual implementation of recharge sites to offset well depletions. And also, in the area of law practice, was one of the pioneers in implementing both a paperless office and encouraging the courts to do the same. He also was instrumental in founding two firms, Lynn Lawrence and Ottenhoff and Lawrence Jones Custer Grasmick. And along the way, it was married, has 3 children and 6 grandchildren. He was also known for negotiating some of the largest settlements in the state, again related to that South Platte well crisis. But his expertise didn't just extend to water law. I was reminded in the lobby here during cocktail hour about an incident where he practiced criminal law when he bailed the now director of Central Colorado Water Conservancy District out of jail. was a very delicate situation. It was a case of mistaken identity. Who knew there was another Randy Ray with multiple warrants, armed and dangerous? Who knew? But that was typical of Kim. He was always there, always available to help his clients, dedicated night or day. The qualities that I've observed in him that I wanted to communicate to you, that I've seen firsthand, are first of all, competence. He was not only an expert in the law, but also very pragmatic. He was all of the things that good attorneys should be. He was prompt, he was communicative, he was efficient. His clients loved him for these things. And an outstanding example, he had a lot of integrity, and I assume he still does. But integrity was one of the key hallmarks of his career. Everybody knew that. He was very loyal. He created an outstanding work environment in our firm, and he was always good to his word. People who negotiated with him, and I'm sure there's a number of you in the room, could vouch for that he was a tough negotiator, but a fair and honest one, and that really was foundational to his career. And leadership. Kim, to me, strikes me as the kind of person that you would follow into battle. I have not had the honor of being a soldier, but I did study history, and in particular the Civil War. And Kim strikes me as somebody that if he told me to charge that hill, I would. Maybe it's because of his sideburns. I don't know. No, it's really something intangible. It's not something you can fake, and it's not something that you can calculate or describe. But he was an outstanding leader and had the right kind of humor and humility to back that up. He often signed his interoffice emails with the term fearless leader. He was a fanatic for Star Trek. Many of you might not know that, and his entire office was like the bridge, right? The whole computer setup, multiple screens, the screensavers, and the whole theme on his computer was Star Trek. So even if he wasn't there, when you would walk by the office after hours, you would hear, the bay doors opening and shutting, or a teleporter. Somebody was being teleported in or something like that. I asked some people around the office for some feedback for tonight, and I just wanted to read you several of those quotes, both office and clients. So here we go. From the office, one of my first memories of Kim was my very first day at LJCG. I showed up wearing dress pants, a shirt, and a tie, and a sweater vest. He said something to the effect of, "Are you going to court today?" I said, "No." He said, "Then we appreciate your effort, but please don't dress like that ever again." We're not that kind of firm. Another person said, "He always seemed calm in the face of lots of aggression and turmoil." And you should have seen what he did outside the office. No, I'm just kidding. Here's another one. When the groundwater management subdistrict settlement was done and he went to court to present the stipulated decree to Judge Klein, he talked about numerous settlement meetings and working through all the issues with objectors. Then he paused and he said something like, "I still think I was right." Just the right touch of humor and respect for opposing counsel, which I think they reciprocated. Someone else said, "He has a unique way of making you feel very comfortable and uncomfortable at the same time. Mostly soft-spoken, but could say something very witty and biting. Always a great guy to have on your side." From clients, honest, integrity all the way through. Another person said, "Kim told me once, hit them on the head with a hammer, then they'll talk to you." Another client said, "Never without an answer, never felt like he was uncomfortable." And from our office, someone said that he is confidently comfortable with himself and being himself without an ounce of arrogance, which seems to be the spring of his joy, kindness, serenity, varied interests, and love for and from his family. So I thought that was a good one to sum it up. Your honor is well deserved, Kim. Come on up. Thank you.
I don't know.
Okay.
Crystal Blue Persuasion. Anybody old enough to know that song? Well, thanks, Andy, for your kind words. I really need you to write down those quotes so I can save them and remind myself of those later on. Well, Allison Scott, my associate, first asked me, I don't know, a couple months ago if I was interested in being inducted as a water buffalo. I had to think about it for a minute. As Andy said, my parents were missionaries in Africa, and my dad provided meat to the seminary students by hunting. This was in the 50s and 60s, which included water buffalo. So I grew up thinking I wanted to hunt water buffalo, not be one. And I looked on the internet to try to figure out what was the whole idea behind the water buffalo thing we're doing here today. And I'm not really sure, well, I didn't really find much, although there are some references to it. I thought maybe it was inspired by the Loyal Order of the Water Buffalo from the Flintstones cartoon. And they wear the same hats, but there was no reference to that. In any event, I see at least two things in common between water buffaloes and water lawyers. They're both very territorial and will not share their water holes with anyone. And they're both hard to kill. Now, I've had the privilege of working for and with some of the best in our profession. Jim Corbridge usually taught water law at CU when I went to school there, but Sandy White was a visiting professor the year I took it, and that's when I decided that would be my field of law. So I pulled off a tag on the bulletin board and went and interviewed with David Harrison to hire me as a law clerk while in school. And I did work there, got to work a few things with Ray Moses. But David Soot advised me that some guy named Rob Beebe was returning to take my place, and he had been on vacation. But he told me, go ahead and call my friend George Vranish, and maybe he's got a job for you. So George hired me as a clerk, but he said, you know, I don't have a job for you permanently, but I'll send you off to somebody when I find one. So he referred me to his friend David Miller in Greeley, who you may not know that well, but David was the water lawyer that started the Central Colorado Water Conservancy District. And so I began my career moving from Boulder to a foreign land, Greeley. And I practiced in Greeley as a water lawyer with a general civil firm that Andy named. But I was the water lawyer in the firm and came to represent Central, local ditch companies, and also the Lower South Platte Water Conservancy District. And as the practice grew, the amount of water law we needed to practice grew. So Andy was my first associate. Then Kelly Custer, then Brad Grasmick, and David Jones, and they've all become my great partners. We still, well, I guess I'm not a partner anymore, but I still consider myself one. I just don't get any money from them. We have 3 associates, so our firm has really grown, and I guess that's one thing I'm really proud of is we've created a great atmosphere for our firm. We have great help in the office, and we've created great working relationships that have lasted. Statistically, we've only had 3 associates leave our firm to try other places, and 2 of them came back. Now, Kaylee White was the one exception, but I can't really blame her because she married John Siren, and he lived in Denver. But I still sort of resent that she ruined my record. The clients, Lower Central, ditch companies, individual well owners, they were all great people to work with, and they had such integrity. I just always enjoyed working with them. And I'll always remember that they, especially Central, believed in me when I was a young lawyer with a lot to learn. They made the tough water decisions, and I was there to help them think through those decisions. and the vast majority of them stuck with me through the years and are still clients of our firm. Although there were a few I had to terminate, and I suppose they went to some of you out there. The water bar in Division 1 I have to talk about because it is so professional and good to work with as a whole. Like good future water buffaloes, all of you protect your watering holes, but you're also looking for new ones, which does lead to competition and adversity. But out of that adversity, which is the system we have, usually come good compromises or decisions. Now, I don't want to paint too rosy a picture. I note there are some lawyers and engineers who mistake overreaching, being difficult and annoying as zealous representation. And I haven't forgotten them. And they are, well, they're probably not here today, so I'll just leave it at that. Since retiring in February, I find the meanings of our professional vocabulary have changed for me, and I suppose the other inductees up here, and some of you closer to retirement, can relate. And those of you who are younger, when you get to this stage of life, you'll probably find the same thing. So let me just share a couple of these. A diversion is something now that I do to pass the time. A priority date is something I have with my wife. Augmentation is something my doctor gives me to keep me healthy. A bypass is a medical procedure to be avoided. A call is something I get from some of my children to see if they can visit or drop the grandkids off. Negotiations are something I do when I try to get my grandchildren to eat what their parents want them to eat. The last application I filed was for Social Security, and the last statement of opposition I filed was when the government tried to deny my wife's Social Security. And a trial is something involved with extended family that I really want to avoid. Emails and letters. I don't get any from you anymore, maybe a couple from the office asking strange questions, but I get them from strangers concerned about my finances and health. They want to help me manage my finances by selling me gold and silver to fill my 401k. They suggest at my age that I should try some new medicines for various old age disabilities, but they're careful to warn me that the medicine might just maim or kill me. So, in conclusion, I want to thank the committee for this recognition. It means a lot coming from water attorney peers. I'll say this, I've been retired since March 1st, and the grass is pretty green in the water buffalo pasture. Ren, my wife, and I have been married for 46 years, and we're really enjoying this new chapter in our lives. Our children and 6 grandchildren are all close by. I've traded in making water to turning water into wine. I've not read a water resume or checked a case docket since March, and I'm okay with that. My clients are all in good hands of my former partners. The pasture's green, the water hole is full, and I have a pretty senior water right. So to my fellow inductees, I want to celebrate with you with a gift of, which I'll hand to you, of the water I've had a chance to turn into wine. It hasn't been like the instant thing Jesus did in his first miracle. It still takes me 10 or 12 weeks. Thank you.
Next, we're pleased to have Justice Hobbs introduce Jim Corbridge.
Well, thank you. I'm going to turn that red buzzer on you there, Kim. It's a pleasure to be here. Stuart, thanks for asking me some time ago to speak about your father. And of course, producing a water attorney is one of the great accomplishments of life after you've been one yourself. Sometimes kids wander in other directions. Jim and his wife lived on the border of now Oklahoma, Missouri, and Arkansas, right? I consider that the true grit country, yeah? Yeah, right. One of my, then I found out it's on a 60-mile lake reservoir, so that makes sense to me. I think when I look around the honorees tonight and those in this room, we're in that generation that inherited the 1969 Act, and we had to try to figure out what to do with it. And when I went on the court in 1996, I had to disqualify from the case that George Lohr was working on, the change of water right case, Thornton, Bijou. And of course, there wasn't any communication with him, with his chambers. He was the great water judge of his day, in my opinion, coming from being water judge in Water Division 5. And then he left us right after he finished that case, and Becky Corliss and I were there in inheriting the mantle, if you would, of the great George Lohr. And here in the mail, I get a law review article that Jim Corbridge has authored. This is spring of 1998. And many of the issues, of course, that were headed for the court, Jim has already talked about here in this article. And of course, then he wrote that great case book with David Getches and Dan Tarlock. I don't know how many editions you went through, several editions. Yes, so the great case book of water law. At any rate, here are these 5 handy measures to understand what George Lohr wrote in the Orr case. Yeah, sort of the roadmap or guideline. Now you want to pay attention when you get something in the mail from a law professor. You know, you learn that in law school. So these are the implied limitations that come through change of water rights and this whole era of shortage, overappropriation, and as we know, the huge drought of 2002-2003. So I just want to cite you the 5 points here that you sent along in this article. Of course, we had to get all these tested by great water attorneys with real, actual facts of the case, and listen to them, because that's one thing that a great law professor teaches you is pay attention to the arguments, read the briefs, think about your vote, and if you happen to be able to serve on a court, and write it as well as you can if you get the assignment. So the implied limitations. Diversions are limited to an amount sufficient for the purposes of the appropriation, even though less than the decreed rate. Well, of course, we faced a lot of these decrees that just had a diversion rate. And then the change of use and brings up all these issues. Second, an appropriator cannot, as against a junior, divert more water than can be used beneficially. 3, a senior may not, as against a junior, lend, rent, or sell any excess water after completing the irrigation of the land for which the water was appropriated. 4, an appropriator, again as against a junior, cannot extend the time of diversion to irrigate lands other than those for which the appropriations were made. 5, the right to change the point of diversion is limited in quantity by historical use at the original decreed point of diversion. So then we got a series of cases having to do with every one of these principles, and many people in this room argued those cases and argued them well. So I think that when we think about Jim Corbridge and dedication to the many, many students he had in law school, and then his service as chancellor for the university, and then one of his great accomplishments, and that is establishing or helping to establish the Center of the American West and rescuing the great Patty Limerick from the history department. That was a singular event. to free her from the group of historians. And we've all enjoyed her recent articles in the Denver Post. And she's into applied history, and I'm going to call it collaborative problem solving. And to be able to see the merit in setting up the Center of the American West and all that's come out of that for so many students and so many of us in community has got to be one of your great accomplishments. So congratulations on a distinguished scholarly career, but also a practical career helping to educate law students and judges. Now, as I understand it, you started off at CU doing everything that Clyde Martz had given up doing, or is that right? I mean, you were teaching a lot of the natural resources courses, and I really don't know how you got into the water law. Of course, Clyde was one of our great mentors and leaders of his generation. So it's my honor and pleasure to introduce and honor Jim Corbridge, and I hope, Jim, you'll tell us the story about how you got into water law.
I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places that this heart of mine embraces.
Well, I want to thank my good friend Greg Hobbs for those fine remarks. And also want to thank the committee for including me in this distinguished group of honorees here tonight, Buffaloes. And I'm glad Greg made that suggestion because I'll tell you a short story about getting into the field, and it illustrates how little things in life can make such a huge difference. When I arrived out here to teach in the fall of 1965, way back when, I'd come from a firm in New York City that had a very substantial admiralty law practice in which I was engaged. And then when I came out here, I was teaching oil and gas, I think, and property. And the late, great Ray Moses was one of the first people I met. And he was teaching adjunct water law at the CU Law School then. And he took me under his wing. First person I really met, had the family over to dinner at his house and made sure I got the hang of being a lawyer and teacher in Boulder, Colorado, and it was just great. He was a great man in every respect. And sometime during the semester, I was busy with my courses, staying a day or two ahead of the students, and I noticed that Ray was teaching water law. And from the rather narrow perspective of the maritime attorney, I said, what could this be? There's no water for 1,000 miles around here. And so when I had a little spare time on my hands, I decided I would just sit in on Ray's course and find out what the subject was about. And first year, I made about half the classes and got interested. And I made half the classes not because Ray wasn't exciting, but because I was so busy, I didn't have time to be sitting in on somebody else's classes. Second year he taught, I sat in on the rest of them. Equally fascinating. And then Ray got busy with his practice in Boulder. He'd moved up not too long ago from Alamosa, I guess. And I guess he told the dean he couldn't make it anymore in his schedule as a teacher, adjunct teacher. And the dean called me, and I knew not what for. And he said, Jim, I understand that you have sat in on Ray Moses' water law course. And stupid me, I said proudly, Dean, not once but twice. That did it. The dean said, That settles it. You're teaching it in the fall. I hustled I hustled to find out something about the subject over the summer, and continued to teach it, I guess, for another 30 years or so, with an awful lot of wonderful students coming through, and the rest is kind of history. I would say just one other thing, and that is, I first came out for an interview, never been west of the Mississippi. I was a New England boy, tried and true. You can probably tell from an accent I've never been able to get rid of. It was in January when I came out for an interview, and New York was suffering a terrible storm, terrible. Airports were practically closed and all the rest, and I was dressed up in an outfit that Admiral Byrd would have approved of. And I got out to Boulder, and got up in the morning. The sun was shining brightly. It was 65 in January. I had to throw off the overcoat and go downtown and buy myself a pair of sunglasses. And I looked around and I said, this is the promised land. And interestingly enough, for me, it has been. Thank you very much.
And last but not least, we're pleased to have Robert Wigington introduce Tim Beaton.
In trying to figure out what to say for this introduction, I realized I really was not that familiar with Tim's esteemed career as a Colorado water lawyer, but that Tim and I had somewhat parallel, sometimes crossing life paths. And so I'm going to talk more personally about those life paths. San Luis Valley for Tim and North Park for me in our early Colorado years. Denver suburbs for high school. Football at the Colorado College, not overlapped. A year overlapped at CU Law School. Moses Whittemire, it seems like everyone clerked for Moses Whittemire at some point. And it was just clerking for David my third year of law school. But David practically ran the Nature Conservancy, or at least its river conservation, from his law office, and invented a job for me that has turned into an incredible run. So I guess I came back to Moses Whittemire, liked him, and never stopped working for David. Tim and I are longtime neighbors, if that's what you can call Boulder and Louisville. We're both fathers with truly amazing life partners and 2 kids each that are soaring like eagles, and now eaglets for me. Tim just spent big chunks of the summer celebrating his first son's wedding. Those eaglets are right around the corner, Tim. Tim is a few years younger than me, and so he was that friend that was sailing right behind. Running and river running, backcountry skiing, biking, and philosophizing over the years. Tim is quite the philosopher. Here's one story of an early crossing of our paths, rafting the Green River from the gates of Ladore in 1981. The year before, Ray Whitten, another CU law grad and Moses Whittemire alum, and I snagged a private permit to run the Grand Canyon. One permit requirement was that at least one person on the trip had to have run it before. Neither one of us had, so we recruited one Jim McKenzie. What does that have to do with the trip down the Green River the next year? Well, the story is that Jim couldn't go, so he sent his ravishing daughter, Barb, who's sitting right here, and she insisted that the handsome Tim Beaton come along. We were slated to camp the first night just below Big Joe Rapid. Not that gnarly, but with a big rock sticking out at the bottom. So what does Tim do to impress his new girlfriend? That's right, he helped smash the raft with her in the bow right into that rock. She was apparently love-struck, and Tim was apparently impressed by how hard-headed Barb was. What kind of dating is that? Well, they were soon married. As I have cut back at the Nature Conservancy the last couple of years, I've been taking lessons from Tim on whether there's life after practicing water law. The good news is that Tim is living proof that there is, and that it can be a very good one. I can't do justice to Tim's work as a Colorado water lawyer for 35 years, and these few words fall way short. He's steady. I mean, this guy is a rock. He's humble, thoughtful, articulate, a poet like Justice Hobbes, but not so published. He's a damn good water lawyer, but a better friend. If you need one, he's sailing right behind.
Thank you, Robert, for your kind words. Sometimes it's better to have someone introduce you that knows less of your life history. So next time around, I'll look for someone of that vein. But Robert and I have been enjoying quite a few activities in retirement. And even though I'm obviously the youngest fellow up here, I do highly recommend this particular status. I wouldn't be here without the nurturing of the senior attorneys, Moses Whittemire, and other wonderful members of the water law community. Ray Moses, David Harrison, Chuck Woodruff, John Whittemire. All these gentlemen had different facets and abilities that allowed me to sort of see how well they were able to accomplish the water practice that they undertook for the cities and water districts and ranchers, and try to emulate all of these incredible attributes that they had. Ray Moses, his name has come up a number of times this evening. He was a gentleman first and a damn good water attorney second, maybe even a close second. He was an avid listener. He respected who you were, whether you were the president of this national company or the waitress at the Med restaurant. He was interested in who you were, and he respected you. And it wasn't so that somehow Ray could use this in the future. That's just who Ray was. And you contrast that to the present day trash talking on all this social media, and you just shake your head and just say, you know, where are the Ray Moseses of today? Certainly a person to be emulated. When I was a young lawyer at Moses Whittemire, I argued an appropriation before the Water Conservation Board, and I made really cogent arguments, and the board seemed to be really listening and understanding it, and the responses were good. Well, there was a senior attorney on the other side who would ascend to the state Supreme Court, who stood up and objected and made some arguments, which I thought didn't have as much merit as mine, but unfortunately, by a very slim majority, the Water Conservation Board went with the senior attorney, and I realized that you couldn't count your water accommodations before they were hatched, but It was that type of bar that the water lawyers of my generation were sort of ushered into, and what an incredible way to go about, day in and day out, being involved in these water matters with districts and cities and ranchers and farmers. I mean, it was just something that you enjoyed getting up and going to day in and day out. I feel quite honored to be recognized along with these gentlemen, and it is a field that just seemed to have gentlemen and women. Fortunately, there were a number of water attorneys, and Castle is here, and we've got others, Madeline and others, that just continues to me to develop in a manner that hopefully is true to the notion that what we're trying to do is do right by the people and the places and the nature of this state, and trying to accommodate and accomplish all the different uses that make this the incredible state of Colorado. So thank you very much.
And now for the Psalm of the Buffalo. Source unknown, not mine. You are Colorado water buffaloes. You shall not want. You sue for green pastures. You create more still waters. Beneficial use is your goal. You follow down paths of reclamation for its name's sake. Yea, though we walk through the valley of the shadow of drought, you fear no evil, for the legislature is with you. Our wells and our ditches, they comfort you. You prepare tables of diversion records in the presence of your enemies. You anoint the state engineer. Few dams runneth over. Surely weather and litigants will vex us for all the days of our lives, and you will dwell in the halls of the court forever. Gentlemen, if you'd stand up, your water buffaloes. Please join me to congratulate the newest herd.